So my first person binge
Continued.
obviously has continued to Germany, and it was mostly because I was trying to find a way to continue to scratch the itch left in the wake of completing Doom and Doom Eternal back to back. Fortunately, obviously, as you've said, Germany have developed some big FPS games. I did think that I was going to play through the original Far Cry game because I remember playing that and really enjoying it, and I wanted to sort of see how it measured up to the later Far Cry games because I haven't played any of them since the first one. But then only the first one was actually developed in Germany.
Yeah.
So I decided to play a little bit of all three of the Crysis games. And as you alluded to, like I remember when Crysis came out, it was being used as the benchmark for technical performance of whatever custom-built gaming machine you cobbled together in your bedroom. And I remember the first time I had a way of playing it, I was so excited. But I remember not really enjoying it that much because, like I said, I'd played Far Cry, which I did really, really like, and that was a few years before. But I've always had a really high comparison bar for first-person shooters because of Half-Life, and more specifically Half-Life 2. And those games, especially Half-Life 2, showed that you could have the most incredible first-person action, an incredible story, writing, world design, and it be insanely fun as well. And I something else I played through in the last month is the first Halo game, because I had a lofty ambition to play through all of the Halo games.
Jesus Christ.
But I had such a boring time with that first Halo game, and I tried a bit of some of the later ones for a more modern experience, but they were just so fucking po-faced. like the Call of Duty games do as well, that they really want to be just a super self-serious, important piece of gaming, and they forget to make them actually fun. Revisiting Crysis, though, especially in light of having just played Halo, and obviously having a phenomenal time with Doom Eternal, I was pleasantly surprised that it was more Doom than Halo, but it also did show its age a bit with its ambition of creating like an open world first person shooter experience.
Yeah.
Not being entirely successful when played with, fresh modern eyes. Well, they're not really that modern eyes. My eyes are older than the game.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it has good grace to always think about what will make the game fun as much as what will make the game impressive. If you look at like the development of first-person shooters over that like first decade of the 2000s, it's really interesting because you could argue that like Half-Life laid the groundwork for what was to come. That was 1998, and then we had Halo, which tried to do sort of even more cinematically with the genre in 2001. Far Cry came along in 2004, in like the early 2004. It was a really big step up then, and then Half-Life 2 came out later that same year, just blew everything away. Crysis then came out 3 years after that, and it's not the seismic step up in game design that like Far Cry was from Halo, or what Half-Life 2 was from Half-Life 1. Even if like Crysis was an enormous technical leap forward, but honestly, like technical performance without art direction just feels really soulless. And it's like, when you see those videos like, this is Mario running in Unreal 5, and it loses any sense of art. Like Casper, friend of the show, friend of mine, friend of yours, friend of us all.
Friend to all nations and peoples.
Yeah. If a game is going for like a hyper photoreal aesthetic, he always just says, if you're doing that, then you're basically just admitting that you don't have an art director.
Yeah.
And I absolutely see his point. I mean, Crysis isn't quite that bad. It's not soulless, but it's not. It doesn't have much design to it, apart. And obviously, its main selling point was, look how far much grass there is.
What was that phrase?
What? Look at how much grass there is. I believe was what...
It sounded like you went fromage, the grass.
Possibly. And it is, it's a fun enough game. It definitely didn't blow me away playing it. I appreciate that, it's got this sandbox open world design. It does allow you to try and approach your objectives in whichever way you want to, and it's pretty successful in that. I was trying to do the first few missions purely stealthily, making full use of like the cool nano suit that your character has, which allows you just to like go invisible or like put on extra armor or give you like a big old speed boost, and you can choose which of the features you're using depending on your situation. But the lack of colorblind accessibility options, which is something I will say that the Halo games are absolutely amazing at, because I played the Master Chief Collection, and like I could get that looking exactly right for like my eyes. But because of the lack of that in Crysis, and the multitude of camouflaged enemies, it meant that like I couldn't see who I was trying to sneak past.
Yeah.
And then I would be like, oh, well, I didn't see you. And I was like running into their legs or something. And then I would just resort to running, gunning, like commandeering a truck and driving through as many enemies as I could to get to the next objective. And whilst that worked, and that's a credit to the sort of the game design, I don't think that approach would have seen me through to the end of the campaign. And I wouldn't have enjoyed doing that. It might have done, but I wouldn't have enjoyed it because it would have just felt just a bit, like, well, a bit pointless.
Not in the spirit of it.
Not in the spirit of things, Chris. But I didn't get that far because I wanted to have a look and see how Crysis 2 and 3 developed, on the foundation. And Crysis 2 came out 4 years after Crysis 1. And whilst it was still claiming to be, the most impressive looking game since the first game, it was also now touting like the revolutionary AI in the enemies that would see them creatively adapt to your own gameplay with as much freedom and versatility as you were able to approach any given situation. I didn't really give it enough of a whirl to put this to the test because I still ran into the same colorblind obstacles that I did in the first game. Like, it's possible that these games just aren't meant to be played on a small handheld Steam Deck. I probably would have had a better, clearer time playing them blown up in 4K on my 60-inch OLED. But I really wanted to give Crysis 3 a go, and that followed a lot quicker after a break of only 2 years after Crysis 2. But within minutes of starting to play it, it felt like a much bigger step up in terms of gameplay experience than Crysis 2 was over Crysis 1. And like the first scenario sees you like plop down on this like shipping container ship at night in the middle of a storm. You pull out like your super high-tech bow and arrow and you start to pick your way through the enemies lurking on the different platforms on the ship. It was incredibly cool. Like, I found myself more able to play stealth to the situation, but then also really lay into the full-on action assault once I've been spotted. And the whole experience, it just felt just really flipping good to play. Like, I appreciated the streamlining that was like attempted with Crysis 1 and 2 with limiting your need to go in and out of menus, but it often felt it all felt just a bit too stilted, having to go between so many different weapons and nanosuit options and other abilities. But I couldn't even really like pinpoint like the reason why. But in Crysis 3, it all just felt so much more fluidly connected. It made for just a much nicer experience. I probably put maybe 2 or so hours into each of the games. Crysis 3 is probably the only one I'd be compelled to return to. It's probably a bit unfair that I went into these games straight off the back of Doom Eternal, which was
the fastest game ever made.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't like go into another game and be like, oh, I didn't like this because it wasn't that game.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, that's why it's a different game. And yeah, Doom Eternal definitely placed some expectations that were never going to be delivered on. But I think one of the reasons why I love the Doom games so much is that like one-man army feel of it. It's something that really jarred when I then went to play Halo, because you've just got all these blokes running around after me like lost ducklings, and they weren't helpful. They were just there to try and provide more of a real-life military feel, maybe. Like, it's why I much prefer the Metroid Prime games when you're totally isolated without having other bounty hunters or members of the Federation Force sticking their noses in. Crysis also has people fighting alongside you, which it's much, much better implemented than in Halo. But it's, your fellow soldiers in Crysis serve an actual purpose, and they've got actually decent dialogue to go along with it. But for me, it just doesn't feel as good as either being super powered and tearing through everything on my own, or having all the tools I need to take down everything stealthily, like in something like Thief or Dishonored or games like that. I know I'm definitely not the target audience for 90% of the first-person games these days, and I know you aren't either.
Yeah.
And like much like with Monkey Ball, I'm not even going to bother trying the multiplayer stuff out unless it's co-op. It doesn't really interest me, so I'm probably missing 90% of the content of games that aren't even my cup of tea anyway. But like, I'm really glad I've got the full remastered Crysis Trilogy, and I think even now, it's been like a few weeks since I finished Doom, I'm more in the mood for something more slower and considered like the Crysis game.
Yeah.
So I may pick them back up again, maybe even over the next month, maybe even tonight, or wait until I can play them maybe big and loud and have the full experience, which we'll see. But one thing I can say is the games look nice. Well done, Germany.